All right, hang on. I've never gone live this way before. So let me. Okay. I think that works. All right. So today I wanted to talk about 5 Airbnb myths that high income earners in particular believe that really drain their tax savings. So one thing that I think is really important to understand is that the more income that you make, the more you pay in taxes, for the most part. So, for instance, if you make like in the highest tax bracket, you could be sending the IRS and your state government combined almost 50%, almost half of your income, if you don't have a tax avoidance strategy, which is why it's so important the more money you make to get the proper guidance from a qualified CPA as well as a really good bookkeeper. So let's get into it. So one of the ways that I think is the best to avoid paying a huge amount of your income in taxes is through Airbnbs. Now, why would that be the case? Because there's a special provision within the tax code that allows Airbnb investors who self-manage, at least for that first year, to have a huge tax write-off. And I'll get into that in a second. But I think, knowing that that's true and that information is out there, people still hesitate to get into Airbnbs. And I think that there's a few main myths that I really wanted to debunk because it is such an important strategy for high income earners to use to avoid paying a ton of taxes. So the first myth that I really want to debunk is that it's hard to get into Airbnbs. So I think the thing to think about is that Airbnbs, yes, it's going to take time because you're acquiring a property. But now there are so many systems that you can use to help you streamline the process of running an Airbnb business. And I use all of those things. So I have a property management software that manages all of my guest communications as well as communications with my cleaner. I set up the templates and then like clockwork, it gets sent out when and I set it up on a schedule of when I want them set out. So I don't even have to think about my guest communication. It just happens automatically, which is fantastic. So there's property management software, there's automatic pricing, smart pricing software, which will amend the price of your listing based on demand and seasonality and all that good stuff. So that's another thing that you don't really have to think about once you set it up. The most important thing that I think will take you a lot of time if you don't do it right is the management of your cleaner. So I've got a whole training session on hiring and keeping a really great cleaner that I'll be making available soon. But I've really dialed in a process for finding the right cleaner and to save you the guesswork, it's not someone who agrees to clean an Airbnb. They have to have a specific philosophy about cleaning Airbnbs. That's the kind of person that you are looking for. But once you get all of your automation set up and you have the perfect cleaner, running an Airbnb business doesn't take a ton of time. I run a handful of Airbnbs, I work full time, and I would say I spend maybe about an hour a week. Sometimes a little bit more if there are some things that are happening with Airbnbs. Like this past weekend, we had to fix a couple of things, so that took a little bit longer, but that's kind of rare. Generally speaking, it really only takes a few minutes a day. So I wanted to bust that myth. And here's the thing. In all of these things that you're paying for to run your Airbnb business that help you run it and make it smoother, these are all tax write-offs. So, well, not write-offs necessarily, but they're deductions on your business. So, this is not something that's necessarily coming out of your pocket. You're kind of getting a credit for it in your tax return that you're filing every year. The next myth that I wanted to bust about running an Airbnb business is that there are a lot of problem guests. That's just not true. And so there's a couple of things that I want to mention here. The first is you have to set up your property so that it is attracting the right guest avatar. Who do you want to stay in your home? Are you going for couples? Are you going for families? Are you going for business travelers? Do you want vacationers? It really depends on who it is you're looking for, and then making sure that you set up your property so that you are attracting that person. So for example, in two of my properties, they're really quite small and they're perfect for couples getaways or individual business travelers. And so all of my listing copy, that is what I'm emphasizing. Now, the other part about attracting the right guests, so you're just avoiding issues with guests overall, like before they even begin, is that you have to set the right policies. So for example, like I don't do single night stays. And I make sure to say that there are absolutely no events allowed at my properties. I think one thing that I have dealt with that I learned from very quickly was because in my town there are people who come as wedding guests or like part of the bridal and groom party, because there are a number of wedding venues close to where I live, and those people tended to be rowdy. And granted, like they're here to celebrate a really momentous occasion, which is amazing. But given the location of my homes in a very quiet neighborhood, it just did not work. So I put in the listing copy, absolutely no events. This isn't appropriate for bridal parties or anything like that. So once I made that shift, and then I made sure that my policies were set to attract the right kind of guest, I've had no issues. Now, that's not to say that occasionally a guest doesn't give me less than a 5-star. In fact, today I got a 4-star review and I knew it was coming. I know the guests that are going to give me less than 5 stars. That's a topic for a whole other video, which I'm happy to get into. But, for the most part, you're going to get 99% of your guests are going to be great. Occasionally, some guests are just a little picky, and they will give you less than 5 stars. Like this particular guest, she booked bringing cats, and I don't advertise saying I allow cats, I allow dogs. But I didn't cancel her booking, just let her stay. And then she complained that I didn't have a cat tree. So occasionally you're going to get a guest who is not quite reasonable, but for the most part, all guests are fantastic. Okay, so another myth that I want to talk about is that like the work that it takes to run an Airbnb versus the income you get, like it's not worth the hassle. That is not true in my experience. In my experience, my properties cash flow, meaning they profit anywhere from $2,000 to $6,000 a month each. And like I said before, it takes about an hour a week to manage overall my whole portfolio because I have it set up properly. So again, if you have the proper education and you have the proper systems in place and you have a great cleaner, it's really not a big deal. Like I really am able to work a demanding 9-to-5 job and run this on the side, and it's not anything that's overwhelming. I still have balance. I take time off. It's fantastic. Okay, so another sort of myth around Airbnb hosting that I wanted to talk about was like having to report every single dollar that you earn, therefore a bunch of it is getting taxed. And we're going to get into like the big myth in a second. So remember that an Airbnb business is a business, and the tax code allows you to have deductions for your business just like any other, as long as you keep proper records. And this is why I mentioned earlier, it is so important that you have a great accountant and you have a great bookkeeper in place. Here's how I do that. I paid a great bookkeeper. I'm happy to give you all a reference if you want to leave a comment down below, and I can refer you to my bookkeeper, who is fantastic, worth her weight in gold. But I paid a bookkeeper to set up my books. I use QuickBooks. I used to use the free Stessa software back in the day. It got the job done, but it didn't quite give me and my accountant the right reports that she needed to be able to maximize the amount I could get back in my taxes. So I switched over to QuickBooks. I paid my bookkeeper to set it up for me, and she trained me on how to run my monthly reports as well as to reconcile, meaning making sure that what's reflected in QuickBooks is what's reflected in my bank account. So once I did that, it's very, very easy for me to maintain my books. I just run my reports and give them to my accountant, and she's therefore able to get me every dollar back that I'm owed from taxes, which is fantastic. And I'm telling you guys, look, I get tens of thousands of dollars back every single year in taxes because I run my business and I run a tight ship. So, you know, it's definitely worth the time that I invest in running my Airbnb business is definitely worth the money that I'm paid because I run it really well and it pays me really well. So here's another myth. I think a lot of people, because there are such big write-offs with Airbnb businesses in particular, if you own the property, that people get afraid of additional audits from the IRS. So I'm not a CPA, but what I can say is you can mitigate your risk. You can lessen your risk of getting audited by, one, having an accountant who knows what they're doing and making sure that they are submitting your tax return properly. So you'll want to work with a CPA who not only knows real estate, but knows short-term rentals, because there are differences between how you treat a long-term rental, which is passive income, and a short-term rental, which is active income. They're kind of completely different when it comes to how you're treating that income when you file your taxes. You file it on different forms. I won't get into it, but you'll need to make sure that you find an accountant who is well-versed in the IRS code for short-term rentals. The other thing is, I just talked about it, keep proper books, right? Save all your receipts, upload them to QuickBooks, reconcile your accounts every month, upload your bank account statements to your QuickBooks. Like, once you have all of that proper documentation and you have a great CPA who files things correctly for you, you should have nothing to worry about when it comes to auditing risk. And if you do get audited, you'll have all of the documentation to back it up. So I really wouldn't be afraid of that, so long as you are maintaining those proper records. So now let's get into the last and final myth that you know, you can't get huge write-offs for being an Airbnb host. And I'm here to tell you, not true. So usually when it comes to getting huge tax write-offs, when you're in the realm of real estate, the type of people who are who qualify to get the most back are called real estate professionals, which means that's their full-time job. They don't work a W-2 9-to-5 job, but they get the primary source of their income from real estate, and that's what they do full-time. Now, there's a provision within the tax code that if you own a property and you materially participate as the short-term rental operator, the host, you essentially get real estate professional status. Essentially, you don't technically get it, but you get the benefit of it. So then you are eligible to bonus depreciate your home if you get a cost segregation study with a qualified accounting firm, and you get that form over to your CPA, your certified public accountant. They can, instead of taking the depreciation that is required to be taken over the course of 39 years, right? So what is depreciation? It is basically a tax credit for the wear and tear on a building. Normally, you would take increments of it over the course of 39 years if you have a commercial property or a short-term rental. If you have a long-term rental, it's like, what, 27 and a half years, something like that. Regardless, instead of taking it incrementally, you can forward a lot of it in year one. And that is how you can get tens of thousands of dollars back in your taxes. And it worked for me. It works for all of the investors that I know that use it. This is perfectly allowable. So it is an incredible tool, especially for high income earners. Like, that's who I'm really talking to. Like, you earn, you know, 6 figures, multiple 6 figures, you earn 7 figures, 8 figures, and you really need tax write-offs. Owning a short-term rental and materially participating at least for year one is going to be your ticket to having a huge tax write-off and tax savings. So I hope that this was helpful. If I have a more thorough video training on this that I'll be making available soon, so come back to my channel when I'll be formally announcing that. But this was cool. This is like my first time um, on YouTube Live. So I hope that this was helpful. I can't really see if there are any comments or not, but leave some in the description. I don't know, down below. I don't even know how this works, but anyway, thanks all. Bye.